What is up, everybody? We're back. Corey Hughes Bloody History. So, I have to say this. I appreciate everybody tuning in and listening to this show. This is not the easiest show to listen to. I don't deal with pop culture. I don't deal with fucking modern day news. I don't deal with anything that has to do with anything going on in the world today other than like the state of the world, right? The state of the world is directly a result of everything we talk about on this show. But sometimes this is a difficult show for me to make it through. So as a listener, it's got to be brutal at times. We get into some topics and some very micro detail on some things that most shows will never touch, will never get to. Because personally, I don't really give a fuck about clicks or likes or fucking none of that shit at all. Period. What I give a fuck about is knowing that I'm doing everything I can to correct the historical fucking record, which is complete bullshit. And that makes for a hard life. It sure does. But I just wanted to say I appreciate everybody tuning in. I really do. Today we're talking about Otto Skorzeny again. And whether or not his activities under Unternehmen Eich and Unternehmen Panzerfaust were as glorious as the propaganda made them out to be, right? So I'm also rereading at this time Ralph Gannis's book, The Skorzeny Papers. It's kind of hard to deny. He goes into a lot of detail on what Skorzeny actually did and what he actually accomplished and how he accomplished it, specifically on these two missions, Unternehmen Eich and Unternehmen Panzerfaust. Unternehmen Eich being the rescue of Mussolini, which was pretty motherfucking badass. It made worldwide news, obviously. And Unternehmen Panzerfaust has to do with the abduction of the Hungarian Prime Minister Horthy. So, you know, if you actually care about this stuff, I give you props because most people in the world don't. Me personally, this is what gets me out of bed in the morning. So we're going to continue on today with this paper. Who was this paper written by? I shouldn't have ignored this guy's name for so long. Andreas Alexander Handschuh. That's who wrote this paper. And he wrote it as a thesis for the Naval Postgraduate School at Monterey, California. Wasn't Oswald at Monterey, California for a while? Yeah, he was. So, one criticism I'll have of this paper thus far, as someone who's written multiple thesis-style papers like this, is that we're on page 39 of 71 and he hasn't gotten to his point yet, if I'm not mistaken. If I'm wrong, if you've just listened to the last episode, tell me if I'm wrong, because I don't recall. But it appears as though he's like, we're going to show this, we're going to show this, we're going to show this, and then we're going to show this. But he hasn't shown us anything yet, right? Except made a valid point that he's laid a good foundation for the groundwork of stating that the Nazis were in need of some good propaganda. They genuinely were. They were at a time when they needed a win. And they needed a hero, which would... Remember, because the propaganda you push has to have meaning internally and externally, in as far as your nation goes, right? So the people of Germany needed a German hero, and he gave them one in Otto Skorzeny, right? So the point of this paper is to sort of somewhat bring into question Skorzeny's true role in his own heroic deeds, right? But all right, let me continue on here. Unternehmen Eich. Critique of Unternehmen Eich will completely focus on this single case, although issues which were already described by the first section general will be also used for this case because of its interconnection with this special operation to rescue Benito Mussolini. Unavailability of documents concerning this operation limits the expanse of this section. As of yet, no reliable official sources have been discovered. Therefore, this thesis will rely primarily on personal sources like Hauptsturmführer Otto Skorzeny's narrative and the description of his adjutant Obersturmführer Karl Radl, an SD administrator, in comparison to biographies of Mussolini, the autobiography of General Kurt Student, and the narratives from Major Harold Morse, Hauptmann Heinrich Gerlach, and Unterofficer Harry Merton. The findings of this section will argue that Otto Skorzeny did not conduct Unternehmen Eich exactly the way he described the operation in his books. The unit under Skorzeny's command was not capable of planning an operation with gliders in rough terrain like Gran Sasso because of their lack of experience and knowledge. Furthermore, members of ZBV Freudenthal were not trained and equipped for being an assault element, while Skorzeny had no leading function over the involved Fallschirmjäger regiment or other units. Skorzeny and his men were even not prepared for their participation in the operation, as photos show, and National Socialist propaganda used Skorzeny for its purposes to show German military strength and German ideals to the population and German adversaries, while a differentiating reporting about Gran Sasso was denied by Joseph Goebbels. Interestingly, the CIA had early knowledge in the post-war period about the real conduct of Unternehmen Eich and the created narrative of Otto Skorzeny. This thesis will provide more evidence than just a sole CIA document, which will be shown by the following. Ooh, okay, so let me tell you this. The author is skating on some thin ice here, and he knows it. As someone who has written a book, and as someone who has had at times some theories that I feel were thin in and of themselves, there is a way to go about prefacing and following up your thin theory. And I'm observing some of these techniques here in this writing, so I'll explain. It says here, interestingly, the CIA had early knowledge in the post-war period about the real conduct of Unternehmen Eich and the created narrative of Otto Skorzeny. Okay, that's fine. Good sentence. This thesis will provide more evidence than just a sole CIA document, which will be shown by the following. Okay, so a couple things here. If you're going to say will be shown by the following, you cannot end that with a period. It must be a semicolon, or it must be a colon at that point. Anytime it says by the following, it must be followed by a colon. And that's number one, but that's kind of irrelevant. This thesis will provide more evidence than just a sole CIA document. So he's prefacing the fact that all he's got is a sole CIA document and some speculation. Okay? That is what he just said without really saying it. But and also he's assuming that you're stupid as an audience by putting a sentence in there like this, right? There are much better ways to go about accomplishing what he was trying to accomplish without doing what he did so bluntly. Okay? So all we're going to end up seeing is a single CIA document to support his thesis and ramblings. So, and this kind of brings me back to what I was saying earlier. I'm reading Ralph Gannis's book, The Skorzeny Papers, and there are some pretty well documented accounts of these two missions in that book. And they were formulated by Otto Skorzeny, and they were pretty goddamn heroic in how they were pulled off. And it's kind of hard to deny the success of these two missions. So whether or not they were as exactly as described in the quote-unquote official story, right? Official stories are never correct. You have to assume there's a level of propaganda in it. So ultimately, I'm predicting here that the thesis will fall slightly flat, but it will highlight an excellent alternative opinion on Skorzeny, which I think everybody needs alternative opinions, even if they're wrong, to make you think. All right, so let me continue. At the beginning, it has to be stated that Skorzeny and his men were surely involved into the search and locating of Mussolini. Kurt Student's narrative is plausible. According to it, that's very poor writing. Student needed support to locate Mussolini after he received the task from Adolf Hitler to liberate and bring Mussolini to Germany. That would completely fit into the intelligence role of Skorzeny's ZBV Friedenthal, and therefore it is also obvious that Hitler chose Skorzeny to support Student's task. Even Karl Radel's narrative supports this, when he mentioned that Skorzeny and Moores were both under Student's command, but not in command of one over the other. Before the media put Otto Skorzeny in the limelight until 1943, the German Fallschirmjäger, or I'm sure I pronounced that wrong, were famous for conducting special missions. Since 1937, German paratroopers were trained in their special skills and created as a unit which was used for special missions like the assault on Eben Emael, the Battle of Rotterdam, the occupation of Narvik, the assault on the Corinth Canal, and even Unternehmen Mercure, the costly airborne invasion of Crete. For all these most successful operations, these German paratrooper units trained hard and had a great cohesion within its units, battalions, regiments, and even divisions. In contrast, Skorzeny's battalion ZBV Friedenthal was a young unit and created with the purpose of operating in small groups behind enemy lines in the Eastern War theater to conduct reconnaissance, minor sabotage, and assassinations. Within less than 6 months, it is doubtful that Skorzeny created out of this group of men from all branches and services a cohesive assault unit, experienced and skilled in the use of infantry tactics and able to conduct special commando operations. Martin van Creveld describes intensively how important cohesion for military success during World War II was, but none of this argument about cohesion within military units could be found, but it should be could be found at that stage within ZBV Friedenthal. Alone, the assault with Lastenslager on a terrain as difficult as Gran Sasso required a lot of experience, which was not available among Skorzeny's crew. Therefore, Skorzeny, who was not tactical trained and experienced, and his men were highly unlikely able to plan or conduct independently an operation like Unternehmen Eich. The Gran Sasso raid itself is very well documented because of the Wehrmacht photographer Tony Schneider, who took pictures during the assault. These photos are available by the German Bundesarchive and can be viewed online. The interesting part about these pictures and Skorzeny's and Radel's narrative is about the uniforms and combat equipment. Although Radel and Skorzeny describe that they got paratroop uniforms and equipment like the FG-42, none of the pictures at Gran Sasso show them. All men of Skorzeny's group are clearly identified by wearing only Luftwaffe tropical uniforms, standard Wehrmacht helmets, and the German standard rifle K98. All members of the Fallschirmjäger Lehr regiment are wearing the regular paratroop combat uniform and helmet. These details show that Skorzeny's and Radel's narrative cannot be exactly true, because if Skorzeny was planning and preparing the conduct of the Mussolini liberation, his men would be prepared with their combat gear and airborne helmets. Skorzeny claims that he smashed the radio of the Italian guardsman with the butt of his submachine gun, but photographs from Gran Sasso indicate that he was armed only with a Walter PPK pistol. Thus, Skorzeny's narrative may be false, and this leads to this determination because of the surely unpreparedness of Skorzeny's men that they did not expect to be part of Unternehmen Eich. So I understand what he's saying here. However, if you've got a bunch of guys from different units who are all very well trained, like really like the top of their class, the best of the best, they would all speak the same general language. And so throwing them into a unit, giving them a set of orders, I don't see a need for this type of cohesion that he speaks of. This cohesion amongst a unit is like a philosophical concept almost. There's no way to measure it, right, or justify his statement. So, yeah, I get what he's saying. He's saying that basically odds are of a unit this young to be pulling off something like this is slim. And that may be true. But it doesn't change the fact that they did it. And the result speaks for itself. Karl Radl and Otto Skorzeny describe in their narratives about finding Mussolini how they were cooperating with other German troops. But it is never stated that these units became attached to Skorzeny. They were cooperating and supporting Skorzeny's mission in a way that he and his troops informed and supported units with intelligence on Mussolini's location. Those commanding officers supported by Skorzeny's intelligence used this information to lead their units and conduct this operation. These supporting units and supported relationships cast doubt on Skorzeny's and Radl's descriptions about their contributions and roles in Unternehmen Eich and the freeing of Mussolini. Although the Fallschirmjäger Lehr regiment was never attached to Skorzeny and always under Harold Moore's command, Skorzeny claims full responsibility for planning a mission with these Fallschirmjäger, but never cites when they became his subordinates. Skorzeny's ZBV Friedenthal was operating according to its purpose in small groups. These groups cooperated and were supported by regular German units to fulfill their mission. Moores and Skorzeny were both attached to Kurt Student. Student tasked Skorzeny to find Mussolini, so Skorzeny did have a substantial role, and tasked Moores to liberate Mussolini. The narrative, which comes close to Student's, Moore's, Gerlach's, and Merton's description of the Gran Sasso raid. Tactically speaking, if Skorzeny would have been in lead of the assault company at Gran Sasso, he would not have been within the assault Gruppe capturing Mussolini, but supervising and leading his whole company, like the real commanding officer, Frere von Berlepsch, did. There are also doubts that Skorzeny influenced his glider pilots to change their position in Student's explanation of misunderstanding, which is also described by Moores, are more plausible. Being one of the first men inside the hotel leads to another false narrative from Skorzeny. In his post-war interrogation about the raid, Skorzeny claimed that SS Oberscharführer Walter Glasner and Sveller assisted in securing the room, but in his memoirs he claimed it was Holzer. In his account, Holzer said the other SS man was Nietzel. All mentioned aspects offer evidence that Skorzeny's narrative and his conduct under Unternehmen Eich may be exaggerated. But National Socialist propaganda made him to recognizable commando, made him to be the recognizable commando, and therefore this section will also focus on the presentation of Unternehmen Eich. The propaganda about Skorzeny was not pre-planned, but fitted perfectly into the narrative which was needed at the time. The existing German military capability to conduct these types of operations and the still existing bravery should be shown to German citizens and Germany's opponents. Also, the SS member Otto Skorzeny was depicted and still perceived as the ideal German soldier who fights although circumstances may be difficult. Goebbels himself stated in his diary that he wanted to eradicate varying narratives about Mussolini's liberation, a decision that continues to influence how many perceive Otto Skorzeny's role during Unternehmen Eich. These details reveal that Skorzeny was unable to plan and conduct a mission with special paratrooper equipment like gliders at Gran Sasso because of his lack of experience and knowledge about these issues. Furthermore, his men were also incapable of conducting this mission alone. Skorzeny never commanded an engaged unit in Italy except ZBV Friedenthal, but cooperated and supported with those which were tasked. Nevertheless, he was there at Gran Sasso and did play a role in the bloodless rescue of Mussolini, and therefore Skorzeny was used strategically by National Socialist propaganda to demonstrate German military strength and to inspire the German people's belief in their nation's victory. Hey, you have to admit that the use of Otto Skorzeny as National Socialist propaganda was some good stuff in it. It really is. I mean, that was like, you couldn't ask for a better centerpiece for future propaganda. You just couldn't. And then the idea that Otto Skorzeny would carry on numerous missions like this throughout his career. It's pretty amazing. So it brings into, for me, it brings into question the author's nitpicking, really, because that's what this is. It's nitpicking, right? Was Skorzeny there on the front lines with a sword in one hand and a Walter PPK in the other? No, I don't think so. I don't think so at all. But it makes for good propaganda, and I'm all for letting the Germans have this one. Unternehmen Panzerfaust. Many military historians classify Unternehmen Panzerfaust as two separate operations with which Skorzeny was involved. One mission was the capture of Nicholas Horthy Jr., the Hungarian regent's son, and the real Unternehmen Panzerfaust, which is the occupation of the Hungarian regent's palace in Budapest. Although Unternehmen Panzerfaust is just about the Miklos Horthy palace, this thesis will focus on both missions because of Skorzeny's involvement. This thesis will rely on primary sources like Hauptstaatsführer Otto Skorzeny's narrative and the use of biographies in the autobiography of Miklos Horthy, Rudolf Rahn, the narratives from the regimental history of the SS Fallschirmjäger Battalion 600, and a letter from the, God, I hate how they spell these fucking words, Hohere, Horror, how the fuck do you say that? Horror SS und Polizeiführer in Ungarn Otto Winkelmann to Reichsführer SS Heinrich Himmler to provide comparative analysis of the recorded accounts. The findings of this section will argue that Skorzeny was not involved in the capture of Horthy's son and played a supporting role in occupying Horthy's palace while the Hungarian regent had already resigned. Skorzeny describes the beginning of Unternehmen Panzerfaust with being tasked by Adolf Hitler for the conduct of this operation. Interestingly, the Führer SS under und Panzerführer in Ungarn, Otto Winkelmann, that's a fucking hell of a title, did receive the same task because he reports to his commander Reichsführer SS Heinrich Himmler on October 25th, 1944. Thus, Skorzeny could not be the only person who knew about this special mission. In the beginning of October, Winkelmann's policemen captured the Hungarian regent's son, Nicholas Horthy, while Skorzeny's men were provided security for the SS police operation. If Skorzeny's men were really needed and got tasked by Winkelmann, he describes, is in doubt because Winkelmann did not mention this claimed request for support. And in Skorzeny's narrative, he and his men were in civilian clothes and did not have any other weapons other than their pistols that they used in a small firefight. Additionally, Skorzeny's men were not at the place where the capture of Horthy Jr. happened. Skorzeny's narrative describes solely the situation in front of the house where Horthy Jr. was captured, while Winkelmann only mentioned Skorzeny at the airport where Skorzeny tasked a Hungarian unit to lie on the ground while Horthy Jr. was put into an aircraft and small arms fire had begun. The second part and the real Unternehmen Panzerfaust, Skorzeny claims that he alone planned and conducted the operation independently, but Winkelmann gave a different report to Himmler, and he would have been judged for lying to the Reichsführer SS. The SS Oberstgruppenführer Erich von dem Bach-Zalewski, who Skorzeny mentions disparagingly, was the commanding officer in Budapest at the time, and he came recently from Warsaw, where he commanded the defeat of a revolt. Winkelmann stated that SS Obergruppenführer von dem Bach-Zalewski, the commanding officer, and that SS Starrenführer Zehender was in leading function for the troops. It is questionable that Skorzeny, being SS Sturmbannführer, took over command and led the troops. This would have been surely reported to Himmler. It might be more plausible that Skorzeny's unit, SS Jager Battalion 502, an infantry unit, had to support the whole operation. That explains why he was not mentioned by Winkelmann. The SS Fallschirmjäger Battalion 600 was the assault company which penetrated the palace through tunnels, while Skorzeny and his men occupied armored vehicles that encircled the palace. Infantry was needed to secure the pedestrian doors and entry and escape routes to and from the palace, and surely to secure the palace itself after it was occupied. Following Winkelmann, Skorzeny's unit performed the same functions as in Unternehmen Eich it supported in operation. It is also false that Horthy fled because Skorzeny's troops and did not give any orders for defending the palace, which contradicts Skorzeny's autobiographical claims. Horthy himself gave the order that there should be no fight over the palace, which may be influenced through the German military presence around the Bergberg. It was also not Skorzeny's men who pressed Horthy to resign, but SS Brigade Führer and representative of the German Reich in Hungary, Edmund Wassenmeier, and the diplomat Rudolf Rahn negotiated with Horthy to resign. Thus, Unternehmen Panzerfaust and the palace raid may have influenced Horthy's resignation, but they were not the main impetus. Interesting. To summarize the findings of Unternehmen Panzerfaust, Skorzeny did not play a major role in capturing Horthy Jr. and was only a supporting commander for the palace occupation mission in Budapest. SS Obergruppenführer von dem Bach-Zalewski and SS Standartenführer Zehender held overall responsibility, while Skorzeny's men only had to secure the palace, where the Hungarian guards were ordered not to fight. This is a great example of how propaganda becomes history, right? Great example, because I think the official story version still is that of the closest thing to an official story version is that Otto Skorzeny is this big hero because of these missions, right? That he played obviously more of a leadership role than a tactical role. Conclusion. To conclude the findings of this chapter, the critique of Skorzeny's involvement in Unternehmen Eich and Unternehmen Panzerfaust has shown that Skorzeny did not plan and conduct these German special operations independently, as he claims with his narrative. The purpose of ZBV Freudenthal was not to conduct battalion-sized special operations. However, after Unternehmen Eich, the unit began to develop into SS Jagdverband and gained tactical experience for further conduction of special operations. In the beginning, German paratroopers provided tactical experience and executed these types of missions. Nevertheless, Skorzeny and his men provided intelligence and therefore located Mussolini, which set the conditions for the launch of Unternehmen Eich. In this phase of German special operations, and partly also during Unternehmen Panzerfaust, Skorzeny's unit supported tactically tasked units to conduct the mission. National Socialist propaganda played a major role in the creation of Skorzeny's fame concerning the conduct of German special operations. German propaganda at the time had a need for men like Skorzeny, and therefore he served a political and military purpose. While differing operations reports were ignored and denied by Joseph Goebbels, these factors bolstered Skorzeny's fame during and after World War II. However, Otto Skorzeny still had a strategic impact on World War II, despite the inconsistencies in his memory of his own role in the two operations on which the thesis focuses. Furthermore, other actions influenced his rise to fame. Skorzeny's strategic value. German special operations are historically connected with Otto Skorzeny, who attained global recognition during and after World War II, even up until now. This thesis identifies Skorzeny's strategic and tactical contributions and presents current discussion about his legacy and missions. His personality and the special operations that are connected to him all have aided to his strategic impact. This chapter will argue that Otto Skorzeny and the German special operations which are connected to his name had a strategic impact for Germany during World War II on 4 levels. Firstly, by using Skorzeny as the main leader of German special operations, he fit into the overall propaganda agenda to influence the German population to support the war and the German National Socialist government. Skorzeny's role contributed to initially successful German domestic information operations that mainly targeted their own populations. Secondly, the SS was using Skorzeny and his missions for recruiting volunteers and improving and sustaining military morale. This was evident based on the fact that SS soldiers continued to fight with low rates of surrender, even when clearly at a tactical and operational disadvantage. Thirdly, Germany presented itself as strong and coerced its allies fighting on the German side, while providing German troops a secure environment for its battles. Lastly, it influenced Allied headquarters' decisions for tactical and operational use of their forces, which had strategic impacts for German warfighting. German population. After spring of 1943, when the Soviet Red Army had won the Battle of Stalingrad, and the Sixth Army was neutralized and captured, the German population's support for the National Socialist regime was decreasing. Allied bombers already bombed the German homeland, and air defense was only partially available and could not deter Allied bomber raids. At that point, many Germans in larger cities had already lost their homes and loved ones because of the war. Now a whole army on the Eastern Front was completely eliminated, and domestic popular support for the war dropped significantly. The German people became increasingly disenchanted with the war and less convinced that all German adversaries had to be defeated. The German government needed to reinvigorate the German population's commitment, and the Otto Skorzeny narrative helped to serve this purpose. With the reports on Skorzeny and his special missions, National Socialist propaganda aimed to foster an atmosphere of strength, which attempted to demonstrate German warfighting's ability to withstand the Allied pressure. It focused on a man who still believed in the German fighting capacity to win. Psychologically, Skorzeny affected the German population's hearts and minds and aroused them to have hope for the future and trust the German government and military leadership despite instances of defeat. Skorzeny functions as one piece of the propaganda campaign puzzle. The National Socialist propaganda campaign inspired and maintained German popular support for German political and military goals through manipulation of information and even staging events. Media reports provided heroes, SS members like Skorzeny, Ike, and Meyer, and highlighted their and other military successes. These efforts translated into successful influence of the German population. This concept of propaganda was effective, and the beginning of 1943, Joseph Goebbels proclaimed the total war, and the people cheered about this prospect. Popular support for the German government was crucial while the Allied forces were attacking and defeating the German military on nearly all fronts and pushing towards the German homeland. For the National Socialist regime, Otto Skorzeny had a strategic impact on popular support for keeping the war ongoing and governing as they did. SS volunteering, warfighting. An increasing challenge for the Waffen-SS and Reichsfuhrer SS. Heinrich Himmler experienced difficulty recruiting volunteers until the end of 1942. The intensity of the war and the heavy losses of SS members was decreasing the size of its divisions. The SS started to create volunteer programs to gather enough young men for fighting the war on Germany's side. These advertisements and volunteer recruitment programs were spread all over Europe to create foreign SS divisions with Nordic-looking men fighting for the National Socialist idea. National Socialist propaganda supported this volunteer program by reporting about successful special operations, which seemed to be not feasible, but were conducted by German SS members. Furthermore, these SS men seemed to prove the superiority of their units. Moreover, Allied forces were attacking successfully and forcing the German military to retreat on all fronts, and Skorzeny and his missions provided the archetypal valiant German soldier who never gives up and fights as long as he can. Propaganda reported and used this ethos to influence other soldiers to keep up their morale and push Allied attacks back while defending doggedly German positions. Therefore, Skorzeny's valiant archetype had a strategic impact on the battleground and on the German morale. German political and military influence. This thesis has already painted the Unternehmen Eich and Unternehmen Panzerfaust strategic environment, because German propaganda connected Skorzeny's name to these special missions and their claimed successes. He and these end states had a strategic impact on the political and military environment. Both case studies focus on a crucial period for Germany and its military. Politically, Skorzeny's special operations served to demonstrate to Germany's allies and regions that the Führer Adolf Hitler would go to all lengths necessary to provide military support and conduct rescue and liberation operations, as in the case of Mussolini's rescue. Conversely, in the operation concerning Horthy and his son, this demonstrated that Germany would take the necessary steps to depose any traitors. Therefore, Skorzeny's political strategic value laid in the capability to influence German allies to stay on their side and fight for Germany and thus deter any defection from the alliance. The strategic value of Skorzeny for the German military laid in developing a secure environment. The German military did not have to fight in a hostile country because northern Italy and Hungary remained German allies. If Italy and Hungary would have changed their side to the Allied forces, Germany's divisions would have been cut off in a then hostile environment, and troops which were fighting with Germany together would have become enemies overnight. Suddenly, the whole tactical, operational, strategic environment for the German military would have changed. By influencing politically northern Italy and Hungary to continue to fight alongside Germany, these governments provided troops, military support, and internal state security for German units. Italy's fascist Saiolo Republic fought on Germany's side nearly until the end of the war, and Budapest defended itself with German units for nearly 6 more months and therefore blocked Red Army troops and provided cover for the withdrawal of German troops. Influencing German adversaries. Skorzeny, at the center of National Socialist propaganda, influenced Germany's adversaries in 2 significant ways. First, it had a psychological impact on the Allies. The recognition of Skorzeny and his special operations proved the existence of German military capability to successfully conduct these types of missions, despite Allied forces closing in on German forces from all fronts. Second, these missions' psychological influence had tangible impacts on Allied forces, especially during and after Ardennes offensive, where Skorzeny conducted a false flag operation named Unternehmen Grief against the United States, and during which Skorzeny's men claimed that they assassinated General Eisenhower in order to provoke anxiety in the Allied headquarters in Paris and tie up U.S. forces with the search for Skorzeny and his men. These psychological operations had positive effects. American troops who protected General Eisenhower became increasingly on edge, and American troops as a whole became agitated when numerous American prisoners of war were claimed to be Germans or German agents. Therefore, over time, Skorzeny's fame and the German capability to conduct special operations like Unternehmen Eich and Unternehmen Panzerfaust stressed Allied headquarters, which resulted in decisions for stationing troops or using troops in a way which otherwise would not have happened. Also, the conduct of Skorzeny's special operations influenced foundation and development of the Werwolf organization, which was created in 1944 to fight as a German resistance force even in Allied-occupied territory. Although the Werwolf operation was exaggerated, this fear led the Allies to commit more forces to rear area security than usual. Conclusion. The strategic value of Skorzeny for Germany's political and military influence are extant, although this thesis stated in its chapter critiques that he had more minor involvement in the special operations than he stated in his memoirs. Through Skorzeny's presence in German propaganda, the strategic influence of his archetype translated to popular support for the war and the National Socialist regime, the support for recruitment of SS volunteers, the strategic influential character on Germany's allies, and therefore for Germany's military, and lastly on Germany's adversaries who were influenced psychologically with tangible impacts. All strategic influence by Skorzeny's special operations had strategic value for the German leadership politically and militarily. The real conduct. According to the Thesis' description of the strategic environment and the critiques about Skorzeny's involvement into the German special operations. This chapter will draw the lines of operation during the German missions. The two case studies will not be described in great detail, but these sections will provide a focus on the real conduct and relationship about Skorzeny and his involvement, his commanding position, and the influence and responsibility he had for these German special operations. Conducting Unternehmen Eich. According to the findings of the critical analysis, this section will draw the operation in two segments. The first part will describe the findings of Mussolini and Skorzeny's responsibilities, while the second part will describe the actual tactical liberation of Mussolini at Gran Sasso. General Student was most likely the tasked officer for liberating Mussolini because of his available paratroopers who had been preparing for the defense of Rome and their experience and capability to conduct such special operations. General Student alone could not locate Mussolini, which led Student to formally request intelligence support. This resulted in Skorzeny and parts of his ZBV Friedenthal attaching to General Student's command. Skorzeny's mission was to locate Mussolini, and he worked closely together with SS Sturmbannführer Kappler, who assisted the German embassy in Rome and had contacts to the Italian police, and SS Obersturmbannführer Dolman, who was the liaison officer of the RSHA in Rome, who had contacts to the Italian elites. Initially, the German intelligence picture was incomplete, and the Germans did not know that Mussolini was imprisoned close to General Kesselring's headquarters and was brought on July 28, 1943, to the island of Panza, where he stayed until August 7, 1943. On August 8, 1943, Mussolini was brought to the island of La Maddalena, and Skorzeny became informed about its location. After he sent one of his men to the island to confirm Mussolini's imprisonment on the island, Skorzeny himself went to the island and verified the findings. General Student received Skorzeny's confirmation and planned a rescue operation under support of the German Navy. But the Italians had anticipated a German rescue operation and flew Mussolini to an airbase northwest of Rome on August 28, 1943, and by car on September 1, 1943, to the Hotel Imperator at Gran Sasso to impede the rescue attempt. Before the planned German liberation of Mussolini on La Maddalena was launched by Student, Skorzeny went to the island and heard policemen speaking about Mussolini's relocation. At that point, German intelligence again lost contact with Mussolini and thus his location. Kappler found a trace within a recorded phone call of the chief of police, which Kappler passed to Student and Skorzeny. Now 3 independently and non-coordinated reconnaissance missions were launched. Student sent Lieutenant Leo Krutoff to the Hotel Imperator under the cover of searching for a possible convalescent site for German troops. Kappler sent his deputy, SS Obersturmführer Erich Priebke, and Skorzeny himself, with his deputy Radl, went on to Heinkel 111 bomber to take aerial photographs. All aerial reconnaissance missions indicated that Mussolini was imprisoned at the hotel on Gran Sasso. Ideally, Unternehmen Eich would have directly followed the confirmation of Mussolini's location, but Italian politics prevented the German mission. On the 8th of September 1943, Allied radios broadcasted the Italian surrender, and Kesselring, being the commanding general in Italy, directed all available German troops to disarm Italian troops and defeat the Italian resistance. Students Fallschirmjäger and even Skorzeny's men came under Kesselring's orders and became part of the Italian overthrow by German troops. On September 11, 1943, Rome was secured and under German control. General Student and his men started to plan for the liberation of Mussolini. General Student ordered an airborne assault with 12 gliders, DFS 230, under Major Harold Moore's command. Major Harold Moores, being the regimental commander, planned the operation and gave Oberlieutenant George Freiherr von Berlepsch the task of assault company landing on Gran Sasso to free Mussolini. Moores himself and the rest of his regiment would secure the base station of Gran Sasso. At that point, Skorzeny's task was done, and he would not have any further involvement in the mission. On September 12, 1943, General Student launched Unternehmen Eich. Before it was started, Skorzeny asked General Student to participate in the operation, to which Student agreed and confirmed 17 men to join Skorzeny, while von Berlepsch and Moores were informed that Skorzeny would have no competence and his men would support von Berlepsch's company to conduct the mission. Furthermore, Skorzeny brought the Italian Brigadier General Fernando Soletti to the airport and hoped the participating general would prevent the Italian Gran Sasso guards from shooting. The gliders were hitched and took off ahead of Gran Sasso in an original formation of 3 glider rows. In a time difference of 2 minutes, they soon broke apart because the leading row took a circling flying maneuver to climb up in height above Gran Sasso, while the following 2 rows stood in direct direction towards Gran Sasso. This maneuver led to Skorzeny's leading flying position. When the gliders landed around the Hotel Imperatore on Gran Sasso, Skorzeny took his men and ran towards the hotel, while the Fallschirmjäger followed their orders and took position around the hotel, securing the possible battlefield until von Berlepsch's glider landed and he led his company. Von Berlepsch made sure his company had taken its position and went with some of his men towards the hotel, where Skorzeny already had found Mussolini inside. Oberlieutenant von Berlepsch reported Major Moore's mission accomplished, and Moores came up to the Hotel Imperatore. General Student had ordered to exfiltrate Mussolini either on land or by air. Therefore, he had provided 2 two-seated F-1156 Fischer Storks, which should take Mussolini and Skorzeny to the airport. But one was damaged on its undercarriage before it could be used for the exfiltration. Student's personal pilot, Hauptmann Heinrich Gerlach, flew the other Fi-156 and arrived on Gran Sasso and wanted to fly with Mussolini alone to the next airport. But Skorzeny convinced the pilot to exfiltrate with Mussolini on the 2-seated light aircraft. Furthermore, Skorzeny accompanied Mussolini until his arrival in Germany. Conducting Unternehmen Panzerfaust. After Unternehmen Margaret and the German occupation of Hungary in March of 1944, German intelligence picked up on the Hungarian regent's attempt to contact the Soviet Red Army to negotiate a Hungarian surrender or ceasefire. Adolf Hitler most likely tasked the Reichsfuhrer SS Heinrich Himmler to plan and conduct Unternehmen Panzerfaust to either press the Hungarian regent Miklos Horthy to remain a German ally or to resign. Through the chain of command, the Hungarian Hoher SS und Polizeiführer Otto Winkelmann got tasked with this mission, and SS Obergruppenführer Erich von dem Bach-Zaleski became the commanding senior officer for this operation, probably because of his experience in defeating the Warsaw Uprising in August of 1944, and his position of being the head of the German Bandbangfung in the Soviet Union. Therefore, the decision to conduct this operation in Budapest would have been in September or early October 1944. Otto Skorzeny must have been informed about the pre-planned operation about the same time. His task was most likely to support Winkelmann and von dem Bach-Zaleski in the conduct of this operation because his lower rank than all of the other involved military officials, and his SS Jager Battalion 502, which did not have enough strength to conduct the operation all alone. The Unternehmen Panzerfaust itself was a mission focused on the attack on the Budapest Castle Hill, where Horthy's palace was located, and focused on Horthy's capture and imprisonment. Winkelmann and his SS policemen trapped the Hungarian regent's son, Nicholas Horthy, on October 15, 1944, in order to negotiate with members of the Yugoslavian resistance under Tito, while Skorzeny and his men supported the operation. Skorzeny's task was likely solely to secure Horthy Jr.'s capture in the way to the airport, while Winkelmann's men brought Horthy Jr. to an airplane to transport him to Germany. The German representative Wiesenmeyer negotiated at 12 a.m. with the Hungarian regent Horthy to either stay on Germany's side during the war or to resign, while Horthy proclaimed a ceasefire via radio. Winkelmann's SS occupied the radio station, and Winkelmann launched Unternehmen Panzerfaust to press Horthy to resign. SS Obergruppenführer von dem Bach-Zaleski, being militarily responsible for conducting this operation, gave the command to SS Stardenführer Zehender to lead. Under Zehender's command, the 22 SS Freiwilligen Cavalry Division, with attached Tiger tanks, the SS Fallschirmjäger Battalion 600, and Skorzeny's SS Jager Battalion 502, the SS Fallschirmjäger Battalion 600 had to penetrate the Bergberg of Horthy's palace through a tunnel, while all other involved German forces were blocking forces around Castle Hill. Overnight, Wiesenmeyer and the German diplomat Rudolf Rahn negotiated with Horthy until he agreed to resign and left his palace, with Wiesenmeyer nearly 30 minutes before 6 a.m. in the morning of October 16, 1944. Before Horthy left, he ordered his guarding troops not to defend the Bergberg to ensure no Hungarian and German deaths. Zehender's troops were not informed about Horthy's resignation, and therefore Skorzeny's men, who were the only involved infantry, stormed the palace at 6 a.m. and had minor fights with Hungarian units who did not receive Horthy's orders. Simultaneously, as Skorzeny's men stormed the mostly undefended palace, the men of SS Fallschirmjäger Battalion 600 arrived. Together, they occupied and secured the palace. All right, conclusion. The intention of this thesis was to describe Otto Skorzeny's real role in the origin, planning, execution, and aftermath of German high-value target special operations in World War II. Therefore, I concentrated on 2 case studies which provided the strategic impact for Germany's war in the south with Unternehmen Eich in 1943 in Italy, and in the southeast with Unternehmen Panzerfaust 1944 in Hungary. Unternehmen Eich was to liberate Mussolini, and Unternehmen Panzerfaust aimed at Horthy, his resignation. Otto Skorzeny presents himself during both operations as being personally tasked by Adolf Hitler and having planned and conducted these operations. Skorzeny claims he had the commanding power over all involved military units and had been responsible overall. The comparison with other witnesses of these case studies showed that Otto Skorzeny was involved in both special operations, but with command responsibility than he claims. In his books. In both cases, Skorzeny and his men were attached to a larger military unit and were only partially tasked with independent planning and conducting of missions. Mostly, Skorzeny's task was to provide intelligence and information. The use of infantry and special forces tactics was not the initial purpose of Skorzeny's units because their task was more agent-like, although they likely improved their military skills over time and by participating in special operations. Further academic work should investigate other special operations in which Skorzeny was involved. So he goes on to go through the rest of his, criticisms and stuff that we've already covered, and has a very long appendix here. But overall, I think he did a really good job of pointing out the difference between fact and reality. And what does this really come back to? Again, this comes back to psychological warfare, which is consisted of propaganda and rumor, right? And these things are not only meant to spread, atrocity propaganda like the gas chambers and nonsense like that, but also, positive propaganda that gives a nation hope, right? So once upon a time, that's what propaganda in America was about, right? At least for a while post-World War II. But now all the propaganda is gone, is insidious in nature. It's insidious. It's unbelievable. The people behind today's propaganda need to go to prison forever. But yes, I think this is a great study, a great thesis. I would have written the thesis a little different. I'd say literally I'd say half this thesis is him saying what's going to be in this thesis, right? So he really included a lot of fluff. But it was really good overall. And this was done by Andreas Alexander Handschuh, December 2017. And that's going to do for today, guys. Thanks for tuning in.